Before we begin in Unreal Engine today, I thought it would be useful to briefly discuss a pivotal step in pre-production for cinematographers and lighting artists: reference imagery. Along with that, we'll talk about global illumination and how understanding that physicality of light in a scene can help you motivate your look. It'll also help us towards achieving cinematic photorealism with our renders, which, by the way, is one of the main goals for this course. And what is cinematic photorealism anyway? Well, in this context, it's to push the lighting and imagery in our scene towards a sense of realism that's usually found in the visual language of live action cinema. And that brings me back to reference imagery. And today we'll be looking at live action reference imagery specifically. I'll be using a website called shotdeck.com, and it's a giant library of still images from movies that you can search through. I've gathered a set of images here that represent the three looks that we'll be doing in the course today: sunlight, soft window light, and that mixed night interior. Let's look at these images in detail and just briefly talk about what we can learn from them and bring into Unreal Engine. So with the sunlight look, what I mainly want to bring up, and this actually goes for both the daytime looks, is that we're going to be motivating light from the windows and not really from lights that are on in the room, even though there are some here. It's safe to say that this image is not being lit by these two small lights. Moving on is an example of sunlight that is just backlighting the room through the window here. But what's important to notice is that the ambience generated by this hard light on the floor does all the work for the rest of this look. So we get this soft ambience. There's also a little more low-key lighting, right? This is a little more contrasty, but the same principle here. This is light through the window, backlight through the window, and it kind of motivates the light in the room. So we don't really question where this ambience is coming from. There's no lights on. In a medium close-up, you can kind of see the same things happening. We don't really question how this subject is getting lit. We just know that there's windows, and it feels as if there's other windows in the room. Going back to the lack of lights in an actual space, here's another example where we've got sunlight in the room and we kind of accept the scene ambience. So that's kind of the main thing I wanted to show in these images. Here's a great image to discuss what global illumination is. We've got the backlight through the window like in all the other images, but here you can clearly see that this hotspot, this portion of the room that the sunlight is actually illuminating, is in turn illuminating the rest of the room. So this is bounced lighting in the room. We've got hard light giving us this bright accent, and that is in turn lighting the rest of the room. And believe it or not, it's bouncing even further. So that's a concept we'll talk a little bit about later, specifically how many bounces you want your light to have in Unreal Engine. Moving on to the soft window light, the same principle kind of applies, where we've got a motivation for our light in the room, so these windows on the left. And in this sense, it's just much softer because the soft source is this actual window. It's not some small hotspot in the room. So in this frame here, there's no light on in the room, but we've still got ambience on our characters and this foreground environment. We've also got a low-key, more contrasty look with the soft window light here. And in this situation, that's done by creating more of a silhouette look and not letting that soft bounce light fill in the rest of the scene. Here's another great example of the low-key look, where it's a little more clear that the actual camera exposure is doing a lot of the work. So outside the windows is a little dimmer. We're exposed for that, and we just don't really see the ambience, the soft light on the foreground as much as a result. But that's not to say that you can't have both. Obviously, we can be exposed for the outside, even if it is a little bit bright, and still have ambience in this situation. We'll have all those controls. And the common theme between all of these images with windows is that we're kind of putting them in front of us. They're always going to be either backlighting or sidelighting our scene, and that just helps to ground everything. The common goal with all these images with windows in them is that we're actually kind of backlighting our scene without knowing it. By always putting it in the background or off to the side, we're in a better position to use light to shape our foreground. And that's kind of a universal truth with cinematography in general, both live action and in animation. Moving on to the night interiors, let's talk about where the light is coming from in this frame. So we've got some interior practical fixtures here, and that's a term from the live action industry, but what I'm talking about are any lamps that are actual props in the scene that we see on camera. We'll call those practicals. So we've got lamps that kind of give the illusion of okay, there's some ambience here, but you'll notice the foreground has this big soft warm light. Well, we kind of accept it because we see these lamps in the frame, and that'll be important later when we're blocking with our metahuman. Here's another scene where the motivation is from above, and even though we see a fixture, there's clearly some other work going on to light our characters in the foreground. And that's another thing to know is that obviously we'll be cheating some lights in our scene to kind of so that they accentuate the practicals that we actually do see. Here's another great reference where there's a lamp on the left and we feel the light from the left, but the light on their faces isn't necessarily physically true light from this lamp. We've cinematically motivated that light from that direction. Here are a few more references that are motivated by practicals. And in this situation too, we see some light in the frame motivating that direction, but we've also obviously got some other things going on to light our character, but it's all motivated from that left side. We also don't strictly need to stay to warm tungsten light, warm incandescent light. We can play with color contrast. And that kind of brings me to moonlight. So we will actually be trying a little bit of moonlight because this whole process is about going through different iterations. So here's a few references of that, but still backlit, notice that. You don't really see front-lit moonlight very often. This final image illustrates that global illumination isn't just something that works with bright sunlight. In this case, we've got moonlight through the window or some form of hard light, but it's blue, so we're kind of thinking it's moonlight. This soft light, in turn, is bouncing and illuminating very softly the rest of the room. Hopefully, looking at all these images have helped to convey one important fact. We really need to care about where our light is coming from. If we combine that with an understanding of the physicality of light, so, bouncing off the floor and the ambience that comes from highlights like that. Well, if we do that, we're moving towards realism. And then we just tack on the cinematic nature of cheating those lights and motivating them from directions we don't necessarily see. Well, all of that packaged together helps lead to the final cinematic photorealistic look that we're going for. And the most exciting part about all this, once again, is that in Unreal Engine, it's real time. And with ray tracing, we've got all the tools we need to tweak and play in a virtual sandbox.